The Arizona wind howled across the Monroe Ranch that night, scattering dust and tumbleweed across the open plains. The sky hung low with a storm, heavy with desert rain. Inside the small ranch house, Clara Monroe sat by the dying fire, mending a torn saddle strap. Her hands were calloused, her dark hair tied back, her expression sharp as the edge of a branding iron. For 2 years she had run this ranch alone, since the day her husband, Eli Monroe, had been buried under the mesquite tree beyond the corral. Folks said it wasn't right for a woman to live out here by herself, not so close to Apache country, but Clara didn't care what they said. She had survived heartbreak, drought, and the cruel whispers of town gossips. The ranch was all she had left, and she'd fight to keep it. Then, over the crackle of thunder, came the sound that changed everything. A thud from the barn. Her head snapped up. The horses should have been asleep. Rifle in hand, she pushed through the rain, her boots sinking into the mud as lightning flashed over the desert. The barn door creaked open under her hand. There, in the shadows near the stalls, something moved. "Show yourself," she ordered, voice steady. A figure stirred, tall and broad-shouldered, wrapped in a worn blanket. A glint of copper skin and long black hair caught the light. His dark eyes fixed on her, calm, unreadable, dangerous. "Get out of my barn," she hissed. The man didn't flinch. He leaned against a beam, blood running down his side. "I need rest," he said quietly, his voice deep and rough with pain. "Just a few days." "You're Apache," she said, the word heavy on her tongue. He met her stare. "Taza of the Chiricahua." The rifle didn't tremble, but her hands did. The memory of her husband's body, the arrow in his chest, flashed like lightning in her mind. "You've got 5 seconds to leave before I shoot." He straightened, swaying but unyielding. "Then you'll be killing a dying man." "But I won't go." For a heartbeat they stood frozen, woman and warrior, thunder shaking the roof above them. "Fight me all you want," he growled, voice low and fierce. "I'm not leaving." By morning the rain had stopped, but the stranger hadn't. Clara found him asleep in the hayloft, his wound bound crudely with one of her old rags. He'd used her supplies, the nerve. But when she stormed in to wake him, she noticed the corral fence had been mended. The horses were fed. Someone had even split a pile of firewood stacked neatly by the door. She clenched her jaw. "You think fixing a few fences makes up for trespassing?" He glanced up from his work, calm as dawn. "You needed it done." "I didn't ask for your help," he shrugged. "You didn't have to." That quiet confidence infuriated her more than arrogance ever could. She told herself she'd throw him out after breakfast. But when he sat down outside to eat the plate, she sat on the porch saying only a quiet, "Thank you." Something in her resolve softened, just a little. The days stretched on. Taza worked silently, repairing the barn roof, tightening the corral posts, mending the old water trough.
He never spoke unless spoken to.
Never asked for more than food and a place to sleep. Yet his presence changed the air around the ranch. The hands watched him warily, muttering behind his back. One morning, Clara's foreman, Jake, pulled her aside. "Ma'am, that Apache's trouble. The men won't stay if he does." Clara lifted her chin. "He's done more work in 3 days than the lot of you in 2 weeks. Until I say otherwise, he stays." Jake's face turned red. "You're defending him?" "After what his kind did to Eli." The name struck her like a lash, but she didn't back down. "You do your job, Jake. Let me handle mine." That night, unable to sleep, Clara wandered outside. The moon was high, silvering the desert in pale light. She saw movement by the mesquite tree, Taza kneeling by the grave. Her heart thudded as she approached. "What do you think you're doing?" He didn't rise. His voice was soft, reverent. "Paying respect. To the man your people murdered?" She snapped. He turned to her then, eyes dark with grief. "I didn't kill him, but I've buried men on both sides of this war. I carry the blame of my people even when it's not mine." The wind rustled the grass between them. Clara's throat tightened. She wanted to shout at him, tell him to leave, to take his guilt and disappear. But instead she whispered, "Why stay here then? Why risk it?" He looked at her, his gaze steady. "Because you didn't shoot me when you could have." For the first time, she didn't have an answer. Over the next week, silence became their language. She brought his meals to the porch. He nodded in thanks. When a wagon wheel broke, he fixed it without being asked. When her mare went into labor, he stayed up all night to save the foal. Each small act chipped away at the wall she'd built around her heart. One afternoon, As the sun bled red across the canyon, Clara caught herself watching him by the corral, the light glinting off his skin, the strong line of his shoulders as he worked. Something stirred in her chest, something dangerous, something she hadn't felt since Eli died. She turned away, angry with herself. He's Apache. You're a fool, Clara Monroe. But the heart doesn't know the language of hate, only the quiet rhythm of connection. That night, as she sat by the fire, she heard his low voice outside, murmuring in his native tongue. It wasn't a prayer or a chant. It sounded like a song, deep and sorrowful. The sound wrapped around her like the desert wind, wild, haunting, alive. When she stepped out, he stopped. "Sorry," he said. "Didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't," she replied, her voice softer than she meant. "It's beautiful." He gave a small, respectful nod, eyes meeting hers just long enough to make her heart flutter. By the time dawn came, Clara knew the truth. The fiercest Apache hadn't just refused to leave her barn. He had quietly entered her life, her land and her heart, and though she told herself it was madness, that tomorrow she'd send him away, she also knew the words would die on her lips the moment she tried to speak them. Because when she saw him there, repairing the fence in the rising sun, shoulders broad against the morning light, something inside her whispered that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't meant to leave. The days rolled by under the blistering Arizona sun, and still the Apache didn't leave. Clara Monroe had expected him to vanish the moment his wound healed. But every morning when she stepped outside, she'd find him already working, mending fences, leading horses to water, fixing the old windmill that had been broken for months. He said little, asked for nothing, and worked harder than any hired hand she'd ever seen. It was infuriating. One morning, as she poured feed for the chickens, she caught him chopping wood near the corral, his movements steady and sure, the muscles in his arms flexed under the sun, his skin bronzed and scarred from years of battle and hardship. She hated herself for noticing, hated that her eyes lingered too long. "Thought I told you to rest," she said curtly. He didn't stop. "I rest when the work is done." "Well, the work's never done on a ranch," she replied sharply. He looked up, eyes calm and dark. "Then I'll stay a while longer." That simple statement, spoken so quietly, somehow carried more power than a dozen arguments. Clara turned on her heel and stormed back into the house, muttering under her breath, "Stubborn as a mule." By noon, word had spread across the ranch that the Apache wasn't leaving. The ranch hands grew restless, whispering around campfires and throwing suspicious glances at him. Jake, the foreman, confronted her at the stable. "Ma'am, the men are talking about quitting. They say it ain't right keeping one of them around." Clara dusted her gloves and gave him a hard stare. "He's done nothing to any of you." Jake spat in the dirt. "Not yet, but folks in town won't like it when they find out you're harboring an Apache. They'll say you lost your mind, or worse, that you've gone soft." She stiffened. "This ranch is my business, Jake. If the men can't handle that, they can find work elsewhere." Jake's eyes narrowed. Eli would never have let this happen. The name hit her like a whip crack. Her late husband's ghost had lingered in every corner of this land, and now Jake used it like a weapon. But Clara lifted her chin, her voice low and even. "Eli isn't here anymore." "I am." Jake grumbled something under his breath and stalked away. That night, Clara sat on the porch with her Winchester rifle across her knees, staring out at the dark horizon. The desert was quiet except for the soft murmur of crickets. She saw Taza's silhouette by the corral, tall, motionless, watching the stars. She'd meant to tell him to leave again, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she said, "You could have gone south to Mexico, or east to the mountains. Why stay here?" He turned his head slightly. "You need help." "I don't need anything from you," he gave a quiet, almost amused snort. "Then why haven't you made me leave?" Clara bristled. "Because I'm not about to shoot a man who's unarmed." He faced her fully then, the faint light catching the sharp lines of his face. "You're not afraid of me, Clara Monroe." She wanted to deny it, but his steady gaze made lying impossible. "I should be." "Then why aren't you?" he asked. She looked away, her voice softer. "Maybe I've seen worse things than a man trying to survive." He didn't reply, but there was something like respect, maybe even gratitude on in his eyes. He turned back to the corral, leaving her heart thudding uncomfortably in her chest. The next day brought trouble. A group of drifters rode onto her land near dusk, 3 men, all rough-faced and hungry-looking. They claimed to be traders passing through, but their eyes said otherwise. Jake warned her quietly. "They ain't here for trading, ma'am." Clara met them outside, rifle in hand. "You can water your horses, but that's it." One of the men grinned, revealing yellowed teeth. "Don't mean no harm, lady. Just thought maybe a woman alone out here could use some company." Before she could reply, a low voice came from behind her. "She's not alone." Taza stepped out from the barn shadows. Calm as stone, but his presence changed the air instantly. The drifters' smiles faded. They exchanged wary glances, one spat in the dirt. "You keepin' pets now, lady?" Clara's finger tightened on the trigger. But before things could turn ugly, Taza's hand came down gently on her rifle barrel, lowering it. "Go," he told the men, voice like thunder before a storm. "While you can." They sneered but backed off, muttering curses as they rode away. When the dust settled, Clara exhaled the breath she'd been holding. "I could have handled them," she said. Taza looked at her, expression unreadable. "I know, but you didn't have to." Their eyes met for a long moment. Something silent passed between them, something neither could name. That night she found him sitting by the fire outside, sharpening a knife. She walked over, arms crossed. "You didn't have to interfere," she said, but her voice lacked its usual bite. He didn't look up. "You shouldn't stand alone against men like that." "I've been standing alone for a long time." He paused, then said quietly, "That's the hardest way to live." Clara sat down across from him, surprising herself. The flames flickered between them, lighting his face in gold and shadow. "Tell me something," she said. "Why do you keep fighting? You've lost your land, your people, everything. Why not just run away and start over somewhere else?" Taza's gaze flicked to the fire. "Because the land remembers us, and I can't run from what I am." There was pain in his voice, an old, buried, but still alive. It stirred something deep in her. For a long time they sat in silence, listening to the desert breathe around them. Finally, Clara spoke, her voice low. "When Eli died, I swore I'd never trust another soul again. But every day you stay here. I don't know what to think anymore." He met her eyes, steady and unyielding. "Then don't think. Just live." She wanted to speak, to protest, to tell him he didn't understand. But the truth was he did, better than anyone. A week later, Clara found herself riding out with him to check the southern fence line. The sun burned red on the horizon, painting the desert in fire. As they rode side by side, she felt something strange, a sense of calm she hadn't known in years. When they reached the ridge, she caught him staring at the wide valley below. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said quietly. He nodded. "Your land is strong. Like you," she smiled despite herself. "You're still not staying forever." He looked at her then, his expression fierce and sure. "Fight me all you want, Clara, I told you. I'm not leaving." And as the wind swept across the canyon, she knew, for all her pride and all her fear, that she didn't truly want him to. The summer heat settled over the Monroe Ranch like a heavy blanket. By late afternoon, the air shimmered above the dry earth, and even the cicadas had gone quiet. Clara wiped sweat from her brow and leaned against the fence post. She had been out since sunrise branding calves, and her muscles ached from exhaustion. She looked toward the corral, where Taza was tightening the last of the ropes that held the gate in place. He worked shirtless under the sun, every movement deliberate, powerful, silent. She hated that she noticed. He had been with her nearly a month now, long enough for the ranch hands to stop whispering, at least within her earshot, but not long enough for the tension to fade entirely. Clara caught their glances, saw the way Jake still avoided Taza, how the men stiffened when he passed. They didn't understand. Maybe she didn't either. That night, as the desert cooled, Clara stood on the porch staring out at the wide, starlit land. It was so still it almost felt sacred. Then she saw something, shadows moving in the distance, horses without lanterns, 5, maybe 6 of them. Her stomach dropped. "Raiders," she whispered, running for the door.
"Jake, Taza!"
The ranch erupted into motion. The men scrambled for rifles, shouting as the riders drew closer. Gunfire cracked across the night like thunder. The smell of gunpowder filled the air. Taza appeared beside her, loading a rifle with practiced speed. "They'll go for the stables first," he said. Clara nodded, trying to steady her breathing. "We can't let them take the horses. I'll hold them off, he said. You'll get yourself killed. He gave her a half smile, fierce and calm. Maybe, but I'll take a few with me. Before she could stop him, he was gone, slipping into the darkness like a shadow. The fight was fast and brutal. The raiders charged through the corral, guns blazing. Taza met them head-on, his movements a blur, silent, precise, deadly. He fought with both rifle and knife, every strike efficient as if guided by instinct. Clara fired from the barn window, her shot steady despite her pounding heart. She saw Taza take a bullet in the shoulder but keep moving, taking down 2 men before disappearing into the smoke. When the last gunshot faded, the ranch lay in eerie silence. 2 of the raiders lay dead. The rest had fled into the desert night. Clara ran outside, breathless. Taza! No answer. She followed the trail of blood behind the barn and found him collapsed near the trough, his hand pressed to his shoulder. Don't you dare die on me, she muttered, kneeling beside him. He opened his eyes and managed a faint smirk. You give a lot of orders. Be quiet, she said, ripping his shirt open to examine the wound. It's clean. Went straight through. He winced as she poured whiskey over it. Burns worse than the bullet. Good, she said, tying a bandage tight around his shoulder. That means you're still alive. He gave a faint chuckle that quickly turned into a cough. You fight like a warrior. She froze for a moment. No one had ever called her that before. I fight for what's mine, she said softly. He looked at her, eyes dark and steady. And tonight you fought for me. By morning, the ranch was quiet again. The men gathered to bury the dead and patch the bullet holes in the barn. Jake approached Clara, his hat in his hands. Ma'am, he said gruffly, if it weren't for him, we'd all be dead. Clara looked over to where Taza sat on the porch, his arm in a sling, sharpening his knife with calm focus. Yes, she said. I know, Jake hesitated. Didn't think I'd see the day I'd be grateful to an Apache. Maybe it's time folks stopped seeing him as just that, she replied. Jake gave a small nod, then walked away. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Clara brought Taza a bowl of stew. He took it quietly, his eyes meeting hers. You didn't have to cook for me, he said. You saved my ranch, she replied. Seems the least I can do. He smiled faintly. A month ago, you'd have shot me for setting foot on your land. Don't remind me, she said, but her tone was warm. He ate in silence for a while, then asked, Why do you stay here alone? Clara hesitated, looking out at the horizon. This ranch was my husband's dream. When he died, I thought if I could keep it alive, I'd keep a part of him alive too. But maybe I've just been holding on to ghosts. Taza nodded slowly. The dead belong to the land. The living have to move with the wind. She looked back at him. And you? What are you holding on to? He stared into the distance, his voice low. Once I had a family. Soldiers came at dawn. My wife and son were gone before I could reach them. Since then, I've been walking between worlds, Apache to my heart, outlaw to everyone else. Her chest ached. I'm sorry, he shook his head. Don't be. You didn't take them from me. No, she said softly. But I understand what it's like to lose everything. Their eyes met again, and this time neither looked away. That night, after the ranch went quiet, Clara stepped outside. The sky stretched wide and endless, stars bright as silver. She saw Taza sitting by the fire staring into the flames. Couldn't sleep either, she asked. He shook his head. The desert never sleeps. She sat beside him. For a long while they said nothing, listening to the crackle of the fire and the whisper of the wind through the sagebrush. Finally she said, You don't have to stay, you know. You've done enough. He looked at her, his gaze steady and unreadable. You really want me to go? Clara opened her mouth to say yes, but the word refused to come. Instead she whispered, I don't know. Taza smiled faintly. Then I'll stay until you do. The firelight flickered across his face, and something warm and unfamiliar bloomed in her chest. Not fear, not pity, but trust. For the first time since Eli's death, she didn't feel alone. The next morning, Clara stood by the porch as the sun rose over the desert, painting the sky in gold and crimson. Taza came up beside her, his shoulder bandaged, his movement slow but sure. He looked out at the horizon and said quietly, There's a storm coming. She followed his gaze, saw the distant clouds, heavy and dark, rolling in from the west. Then we'd better face it together, she said. He turned to her, a hint of a smile on his lips. Together, he agreed. And though neither spoke the words aloud, they both knew the truth. Somewhere in that long, quiet battle between enemies and allies, something deeper had begun to grow. Something that neither wind nor war could tear apart. The desert sky darkened unnaturally that afternoon, the sun hidden behind swollen gray clouds. The wind whipped across the Monroe Ranch, rattling shutters and carrying the sharp scent of rain. Clara Monroe watched the horizon nervously, sensing the storm approaching. She had seen storms before, storms that tore fences apart and drowned crops, but there was something different about this one. Something urgent, looks like trouble, she muttered to herself, brushing her hair from her face as she surveyed the corral. A shadow fell across the porch, and Taza appeared beside her, his dark eyes scanning the sky as though he could read it better than any weather report. His shoulder still bore the mark of the bullet wound from the raid a week ago, but he moved with the same quiet strength as always. "We'll need to secure the horses and the barns," he said, his voice calm, commanding. "Storms like this don't wait." Clara nodded, though she bristled at his tone. "I've handled storms before. I don't need your advice." He didn't reply immediately. Instead, he walked to the gate, examining it carefully, then back to her. "Better to prepare than regret." She swallowed her pride. "You're right," she admitted softly. By late afternoon, the storm hit with sudden ferocity. Rain slashed across the plains, wind howling through the canyon like a wild animal. The horses panicked, kicking and whinnying, and the ranch hands struggled to keep them calm. Clara shouted over the roar of the storm, directing them to secure the gates. Taza moved like a shadow through the chaos, his hands firm and confident as he calmed the animals and guided the men. Clara noticed the way he spoke to the horses, softly but firmly, his dark eyes steady and unflinching. At one point, a frightened mare reared, nearly knocking over Clara. Without thinking, Taza caught her, his strong hands gripping the animal's reins while keeping hers steady. Their bodies pressed together briefly, rain soaking both of them, hearts hammering from fear and adrenaline. Clara tore herself away, cheeks burning. "Watch where you're going," she snapped, but her voice lacked its usual bite. He didn't answer, only gave her that calm, unreadable look. She felt something stir deep inside her, a mix of gratitude, admiration, and something she dared not name. As night fell, the storm showed no mercy. Lightning cracked across the sky, followed by thunder that shook the earth. Clara and Taza worked side by side, securing the last of the gates and checking the barns. Finally, exhausted and soaked to the bone, they took shelter in the main house. Fire crackled in the hearth, steam rising from mugs of bitter coffee. Clara's hands shook slightly as she poured the liquid. She noticed Taza watching her, eyes dark and intense. "You did well today," he said quietly, voice carrying a weight that made her look up. "You did most of it," she replied, trying to keep her tone neutral. He shook his head. "We did it together." The words lingered in the room, unspoken meaning hanging between them. Clara's chest tightened. She wanted to speak, to ask something she didn't understand herself. Instead, she set the mugs on the table and moved to the window, watching the rain lash against the glass. Hours passed. The storm raged outside, but the fire kept the house warm. Finally, she couldn't ignore the tension any longer. She turned to find Taza standing by the hearth, his silhouette framed by the firelight, water dripping from his hair and jacket. "Why won't you leave?" she asked softly, almost a whisper. He looked at her, expression steady, eyes glinting in the firelight. "Because I've found peace here," he said, voice low, deliberate. "With you," Clara's breath caught. She shook her head, trying to push back the emotions rising inside her. "You shouldn't feel anything for me. We come from different worlds." "Maybe," he replied. "But the heart doesn't care for borders, Clara Monroe. It only knows what it wants." She looked away, trying to hide the flush in her cheeks, but he moved closer, closing the distance between them. The warmth of his presence, the scent of rain and leather, made her pulse race. "I can't," she began, then stopped. Words failed her. He reached out, brushing a wet strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered, gentle but commanding. "You don't have to fight it," he said. Clara's hands trembled as she tried to pull away, but the fire in his eyes held her in place. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside her, wild and unstoppable. Lightning illuminated the room for an instant, and in that flash she saw him clearly, not as an Apache warrior, not as an intruder on her land, but as a man, strong, fierce, and alive. And for the first time she realized she didn't want him to leave. When he leaned closer, her heart pounded so violently she thought he would hear it. The heat between them was palpable, a quiet, growing force neither could deny. "You don't have to say it," he murmured, so close she could feel his breath. She swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "I don't know what I feel." "Then don't speak," he said simply. "Show me instead." And in that moment, words weren't needed. They moved together, drawn by a force older than fear, older than pride, older than the desert itself. The fire crackled, the storm raged, and the world outside ceased to exist. They held each other close, two souls from opposite worlds finding refuge in the other's arms. The night stretched long and unbroken, a sanctuary amid the chaos of life and nature. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the ranch washed clean and sparkling under the early morning sun. Birds called across the fields, and the scent of wet earth filled the air. Clara woke alone for a moment, staring at the rising sun through the window. Then she felt the warmth behind her, and Taza's presence beside her made her heart flutter. He had stayed the night quiet and steadfast, proving what his words had said: he was not leaving. Clara rose slowly, brushing the damp hair from her face. She met his gaze, and for the first time, she spoke the truth she had been holding back. "You don't have to go," she said softly, almost a whisper. He smiled faintly, that fierce, calm smile that had first captivated her. "I told you, Clara," he said. "I'm not leaving." She returned the smile, heart swelling with a mixture of relief and longing. The storm had passed, but its echo remained, in their closeness, in the unspoken promise, in the quiet certainty that neither would be alone again. And as they stepped outside together, the desert stretching endlessly before them, Clara knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, raiders, soldiers, or the unforgiving land, they would face it together. For the first time in years, the ranch felt like home, not because of the land alone, but because of the man who had refused to leave it, and refused to leave her. The desert morning was calm, almost unnaturally so, as if the land itself were holding its breath. Clara Monroe stood on the porch of her ranch, watching the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of gold and rose, the light catching the dust still clinging to the earth after the storm. For a moment, it was easy to forget the danger that always lingered near the edges of the frontier. But danger had a way of finding those who dared to live freely. A rider appeared on the ridge, silhouetted against the rising sun. Soldiers. Clara's heart clenched. She knew immediately who they were looking for. Taza. Her hand went to the side of the porch, clutching a revolver she had long hoped she'd never need. Her chest tightened as the men approached, the sound of hooves pounding the dirt like thunder. Taza appeared behind her, bandaged shoulder healed enough to ride. His expression was calm, unreadable, but his eyes darkened when he saw the soldiers. "They've come for you," Clara said quietly. He nodded, eyes scanning the approaching riders. "I'll handle them," he said. "No," she said firmly. "We handle this together." He studied her for a long moment. Then slowly a small smile appeared. "I wouldn't have it any other way." The soldiers rode up, boots kicking up dust, rifles ready. One dismounted and called out, voice sharp, "Taza! Surrender yourself and come quietly, or we'll take you by force." Taza stepped forward, but Clara grabbed his arm. "Stop, listen to me," he paused. "What is it?" "They'll take you and kill you if you go alone. But if you stay, we can face them together. I won't let them harm you." He looked at her, the faintest hint of admiration in his gaze. "You risk a lot for me." "Risk?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. "Taza, I've risked everything already. My ranch, my life, and my heart. You've already become part of it. I won't lose either now." The soldiers hesitated, unsure of how to act against the pair who had already survived raiders and storms. Taza slowly stepped forward. His voice was calm, commanding, "We leave together, or no one leaves. You will not take me without consequences." Clara placed a hand on his shoulder. "We ride at dawn, together." As the day turned to evening, they packed the essentials. Clara carefully loaded her saddlebag while Taza checked his horse, each movement deliberate, silent, intimate in a way that made her pulse quicken. The ranch seemed to hold its breath. Every corner, every fence post, every tree and stone had witnessed the battles, the storms, the quiet moments between them. Clara took one last look at the homestead, the place that had been her life, her safety, her grief. She felt a tug in her chest. She would leave it behind, but she knew she carried its spirit with her, and with Taza, she would create something new. When they finally mounted, side by side the sun had sunk low, casting long shadows across the desert. Taza glanced at her, eyes softened. "You could go back," he said quietly. "I could," she replied, "but I won't, not without you." He leaned closer, voice low. "Then we ride together, Clara Monroe. 2 worlds, 1 path." She nodded, heart swelling, gripping the reins tightly as her horse stepped forward. The ride was long, dust rising behind them, the desert vast and unending, but Clara felt no fear. Every beat of her heart matched his, every glance between them a promise. They were no longer widow and warrior, stranger and rancher. They were partners, equals, bound by trust, courage, and a love that had grown slowly but fiercely in the harshest of lands. The mountains rose ahead, jagged and imposing, a new home waiting for them. They would face unknown dangers there, perhaps more storms, perhaps more battles, but now together, they were ready. As the sun finally disappeared behind the peaks, Clara looked at Taza. His hand brushed hers briefly, a touch gentle and steady, speaking more than words ever could. "I told you I wouldn't leave," he murmured. "I know," she replied, her voice soft yet filled with certainty, "and I wouldn't have it any other way." He smiled, that fierce, calm smile, the same one that had captured her attention from the very first night in the barn. And for the first time, Clara truly believed in the life ahead of them. 2 worlds intertwined, a rancher's daughter and the fiercest Apache, finding a home in each other in the endless wild frontier. They rode into the night, the stars above them bright and endless. Behind them lay the ranch, a place of memories, struggle, and grief. Ahead lay the unknown, the adventure and the freedom they had both fought to claim. And as they disappeared into the desert horizon, side by side, Clara knew this truth: no matter the storms, the battles, or the dangers that awaited, she would never be alone again, because the fiercest Apache had chosen to stay, and she had chosen him.